They said my fence was 1 inch too high, 1 inch, and somehow that was enough to threaten me with daily fines, legal action, and a deadline that felt less like a request and more like a warning shot. Funny thing is, that same fence had been quietly solving a problem they didn't even know existed, a problem that, without it, would come back faster than any of them were ready for. I still remember the envelope, thin, white, no return address that meant anything personal, just the HOA logo stamped in the corner like it carried authority all by itself. It was sitting halfway out of my mailbox like it had been shoved in with just enough force to say, "We didn't come to talk. We came to tell." No knock on the door, no neighborly heads up, just paper and ink deciding what I was supposed to do with something that had been part of my home longer than most of the people on this street had even lived here. I stood there at the curb for a second longer than I needed to, reading it twice, then a third time. Fence exceeds permitted height by approximately 1 inch. Homeowner is required to bring structure into compliance within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine. 7 days? Like I'd built the thing last weekend on a whim. Now here's the part that got under my skin. It wasn't just the notice. It was the tone, the assumption that I was out of line, that I had cut corners or tried to get away with something. That fence wasn't some random weekend project. It had been there since before the HOA even existed, back when this neighborhood was just a loose collection of houses and people who actually talked to each other. I leaned against my truck and looked over at the fence cedar boards, weathered just enough to show age but still solid, standing a little taller than the standard line everyone else had settled into over the years. Behind it was my yard, quiet, private, the one place on this block where you couldn't hear the constant barking from the Donnelly house or feel eyes from second-story windows drifting over your shoulder while you tried to enjoy a cup of coffee. And yeah, maybe it was an inch higher. Maybe. But that inch wasn't an accident. That inch had a story. I folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and walked inside, already feeling that slow burn building. Not explosive anger, just that steady kind that sits in your chest and starts asking questions. Who filed this? Why now? And more importantly, what did they think would actually happen when they pushed this? I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, right next to an old coffee mug I probably should have thrown out years ago, but never did. Same way I never messed with that fence. Some things stay because they matter, even if nobody else sees why. Later that afternoon, I found out who had started it. Her name was Karen Whitmore. And yeah, I know how that sounds. But sometimes life really does lean into the stereotype a little too perfectly. She had moved in about a year ago, corner lot, freshly renovated house, always out walking with that tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. The kind of person who notices things not in a curious way, but in a corrective one. I ran into her while I was checking the mail again, more out of habit than expectation. "Oh, good," she said, spotting me like she'd been waiting. "You got the notice." Not a question. A confirmation. I looked at her for a second, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I got it." She crossed her arms, glancing past me toward the fence like it had personally offended her. "It's just consistency matters in a neighborhood like this. Standards, you know? Standards." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so clean, so detached from reality. "That fence has been there longer than the HOA," I said, keeping my voice even. "Nobody's had an issue with it." "Well," she replied, tilting her head just slightly, "I did some reviewing. And technically, it's out of compliance." Technically. That word again, like it erased history, context, common sense. I could feel that burn sharpen a little. "So you reported it?" She didn't flinch. I followed procedure. Of course she did. There was a pause. One of those quiet standoffs where nothing moves, but everything's happening underneath. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car passed. Life kept going, but right there, it felt like a line had been drawn over something bigger than a fence. "You've got 7 days," she added, almost gently, like she was doing me a favor by reminding me. I nodded again, slower this time. "Yeah, I read that part." And then I walked away, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. Because whatever this was, it wasn't just about an inch of wood. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. Old documents, property records, things my dad had kept organized in that meticulous way he had. He used to say, "Paper matters when people forget." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then. But sitting at the table, Flipping through those files, I started to. And then I found it. A survey map, yellowed at the edges, lines drawn by hand and precision both, and attached to it. Something I hadn't thought about in a long time. A drainage agreement. Signed. Dated. Binding. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it as pieces started clicking into place. Not fast, not dramatic. Just slow, steady realization building into something sharper. That fence wasn't just a fence. And that inch they were so focused on. It was the difference between control and consequences. I sat there a long time with that paper in my hands, longer than I probably needed to, just tracing the lines with my finger like they might change if I looked at them from a different angle. My dad's handwriting was in the margins, neat and tight. Little notes about elevation, runoff direction, seasonal flow, the kind of details nobody pays attention to until something goes wrong. And that's when it hit me, not all at once, but in layers. That fence wasn't built for privacy. Not really. It was built because water doesn't care about property lines. Back before any of these houses had matching mailboxes and HOA-approved paint colors, this whole block had a problem. Every heavy rain would turn my backyard into a basin. Everything uphill, which was most of the neighborhood, would drain straight down into this low pocket of land. And it didn't just sit there politely. It pooled, spread, seeped, and if it got bad enough, it started pushing toward foundations. My dad saw it early. He wasn't the kind of man who waited for problems to prove themselves twice. He talked to the neighbors back then, real conversations, not notices, walked the boundary lines with them, figured out where the water wanted to go, not where people wished it would. And what they agreed on, what they signed, was simple in principle but precise in execution. A shallow drainage channel would run along the property line, guided by a slightly elevated boundary, the fence. Not just for marking space, but for shaping flow. The agreement was clear. The channel had to remain unobstructed, and the boundary elevation couldn't be altered in a way that redirected water back toward the neighboring lots. It wasn't optional. It wasn't decorative. It was structural, just not in a way most people could see at a glance. I remember helping him dig parts of that channel when I was a kid, sweating in the summer heat, complaining about rocks, not understanding why we were so careful about slope and depth. He'd stop every now and then, wipe his hands on his jeans, and say, "Water always wins, unless you give it somewhere to go." At the time, it sounded like one of those vague life lessons adults throw around. Sitting there now, I realized it wasn't vague at all. I looked back at the notice on the counter. 7 days to cut the fence down by an inch. 1 inch, which, according to this agreement, was just enough to change how water moved along that line. Just enough to let it spill over instead of being guided away. And here's the thing, they didn't know. Not Karen, not the HOA board, not any of the newer homeowners who bought into clean lawns and quiet streets without ever asking how those things stayed that way. To them, it was just a fence that didn't match the rules. To me, it was the rule that kept everything else from falling apart. I could have taken the easy route, trimmed it down, avoided the fines, moved on. That's probably what most people would have done. Keep the peace, don't make waves, especially over something that small. But it wasn't small. And more than that, the way it was handled, the assumption, the pressure, the complete lack of conversation, it sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't ignore. So I didn't cut the fence. Instead, I went outside the next morning with a shovel. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement, no confrontation. Just me, walking the length of that boundary line, looking at the channel that had slowly filled over the years, not blocked, but softened, worn down by time. Landscaping, small changes nobody thought twice about. Grass had crept in along the edges, soil had settled, parts of it weren't as defined as they used to be. It still worked, mostly, but not the way it was originally designed. And if they wanted things done by the book, then that's exactly what I was going to give them. I started clearing it out, cutting back the overgrowth, re-establishing the slope, digging it just enough to match the original specs on the survey. It took hours, longer than I expected, the kind of work that leaves your hands raw and your back reminding you you're not as young as you used to be. Around midday, I noticed movement from the other side of the fence, shadows, voices, curiosity turning into concern. "Hey, what are you doing over there?" a voice called out. That was Mark Donnelly, lived 2 houses up, the one with the dogs that never seemed to get tired of barking. "Maintenance." I called back, not looking up. "Maintenance of what?" I paused, leaning on the shovel for a second. Drainage. There was a beat of silence, then a quieter, less certain, drainage? Yeah, I said, going back to work. Just putting things back the way they're supposed to be. I could feel it then, that subtle shift, the moment when something ordinary starts to feel like it might not be. By the next day, word had spread. It always does in neighborhoods like this. Information moves faster than facts, and by the time it gets to the end of the street, it's carrying more tone than truth. Karen showed up mid-afternoon, heels clicking a little sharper than necessary against the pavement as she walked up my driveway. I saw her from the corner of my eye, but didn't stop digging. "What exactly are you doing?" she asked, arms crossed again. That same posture she'd had at the mailbox. I drove the shovel into the ground, stepped on it, and lifted another section of packed dirt before answering. "Restoring the drainage channel." Her brow tightened. "Why?" I finally looked at her, just for a second. "Because it's part of the original property agreement." She let out a short, dismissive breath. "This is about the fence. You can't just. It's all connected." I cut in, not raising my voice, just stating it. "The fence height, the channel, the runoff. It's in the documents." "What documents?" she snapped. I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked over to the porch, and picked up a copy I'd printed that morning. Held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it. I watched her eyes move across the page. Not quickly, not confidently, just enough to recognize that this wasn't something she'd seen before. "This isn't in the HOA guidelines," she said finally. "No," I replied. "It's older than the HOA." Another pause, heavier this time. "Well," she said, folding the paper a little too tightly, "that doesn't change the violation notice." I nodded. "Maybe not." And that was it. She turned, walked back down the driveway, but not with the same certainty she arrived with. Over the next couple of days, I finished the work. Clean lines, proper slope, exactly as documented. No shortcuts, no guesswork. And then we waited. It didn't take long. The first real storm of the season rolled in on a Thursday night. One of those steady, soaking rains that doesn't make a lot of noise, but doesn't let up either. I sat by the window for a while, just listening, watching the water trace its paths across the yard, toward the channel, along the boundary. And for the first time in years, it was moving exactly the way it was supposed to. Somewhere around midnight, I heard it. Not here, but beyond the fence. Voices, doors opening. That sharp edge of confusion turning into concern. Water had found its way back to where it had always wanted to go. Just not where people had gotten used to it being. By the time the rain really settled in, that slow, relentless kind that soaks through everything without ever raising its voice, the neighborhood didn't sound like itself anymore. No barking dogs, no late-night TVs humming through open windows, just the steady patter of water and, underneath it, something else, movement, confusion, the kind of noise people make when they realize something isn't behaving the way they expect. I stood by the back window for a while, not doing much, just watching, coffee in hand, lights off inside, so I could see clearer outside. The channel was working exactly the way my dad designed it, water flowing clean along the boundary, guided, controlled, almost quiet in how efficient it was. But beyond that line, that was a different story. At first it was subtle, puddles forming where lawns used to stay dry, water gathering near the edges of driveways, then creeping, inch by inch, toward garage doors that had never had to think about sealing anything out. You could almost see the moment it clicked for people, when inconvenience turned into concern. Then the doors started opening. Voices carried through the rain. "Why is it pooling here? It's never done this before. Check the side yard." Flashlights cut through the dark, beams bouncing off water that had nowhere to go anymore, because for years, it had been quietly redirected, managed, absorbed by a system nobody bothered to understand. Until now. Around 1 a.m., I heard a car door slam hard enough to echo. Then footsteps, quick, uneven, and a knock on my front door that wasn't polite or patient. I already knew who it was. I opened it to find Karen standing there, hair damp, jacket thrown over whatever she'd been wearing inside. That composure she usually carried completely gone. "There's water coming up into the yards," she said, not even greeting me, just pushing the words out like they might outrun the situation. "It's backing up near the Donnelly's garage. This started after you, whatever you did back there." I leaned against the doorframe, letting a second pass before answering. Not to be dramatic, just to make sure I said it clean. It didn't start, I said. It went back. Her eyes narrowed. What does that even mean? It means, I continued, calm, steady, that water's following the original drainage path. The one that's been in place since before any of us were dealing with HOA rules. That's not possible, she shot back. We've never had flooding here. I tilted my head slightly. No, you haven't. And there it was, that gap between experience and reality. The difference between something never happening and something being actively prevented. She stared at me for a moment, searching for something, maybe an apology, maybe a reversal, something that would put things back the way she understood them. You need to fix this, she said finally, and there was a crack in it now, not authority, urgency. I didn't break it, I replied. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Behind her, more neighbors were gathering. Mark Donnelly among them, pacing near the edge of his driveway, water already licking at the bottom of his garage door. Hey, he called out, spotting me. Something's wrong with the drainage. It's all coming this way now. I stepped out onto the porch, rain tapping against the wood above us, cool air carrying that damp, heavy smell of wet soil, and something just slightly off balance. Nothing's wrong, I said. It's working the way it was designed. That doesn't help me, he snapped, pointing back toward his house. I've got water where I've never had water before. I nodded once. Yeah, I know. Karen turned toward him, then back to me. You altered something. You had no right to. I restored something. I corrected, still not raising my voice. There's a difference. And then, because this had gone far enough into assumptions and not far enough into facts, I went back inside, grabbed the folder I'd been keeping on the counter, and came back out. Here, I said, handing it to her again, but this time with more weight behind it. Original survey, drainage agreement, signed by the previous property owners, including yours. She took it, slower this time, flipping it open under the porch light while the rain kept falling around us like it didn't care about any of this. Mark leaned in, reading over her shoulder. What is this? He muttered. It's the reason your garage hasn't flooded for the past 10 years, I said. They both went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are thinking of what to argue next, the kind where something shifts, where the ground under what they believe starts to feel less solid. The channel runs along this line, I continued, pointing to the diagram. My fence isn't just a boundary. It maintains the elevation needed to keep the water moving away from your properties. Lower it, even by an inch, and it changes the flow, which, according to this agreement, I'm not allowed to do. Karen's grip on the paper tightened slightly. This wasn't disclosed. It was recorded, I said. Same place everything else is. Nobody looked. Another long pause, rain filling the space where certainty used to be. So what are we supposed to do now? Mark asked, quieter this time. I exhaled slowly, glancing past them toward the water still gathering in places it hadn't been allowed to reach in years. The same thing that was agreed to from the start, I said. Maintain the system, not fight it. By morning, the rain had eased, not stopped completely, but softened enough to leave behind the aftermath without adding to it. Lawns were saturated, a few garages had taken on water, nothing catastrophic, but enough to shake that illusion of control people had gotten comfortable with. The HOA showed up before noon. 2 board members, clipboards in hand, trying to piece together a situation they didn't fully understand yet. Karen was with them, quieter now, less certain in the way she stood, like she was recalibrating in real time. We walked the boundary together. I showed them the channel, the documents, the original agreement, step by step, no rush, no attitude, just facts laid out where they could see them. To their credit, they listened. One of them, an older guy named Harris, adjusted his glasses halfway through and let out a low whistle. This should have been flagged years ago, he said. It overrides the standard fence regulation. Yeah, I replied. It does. By the end of the week, the notice was gone. Fines dropped. And I got a letter, official this time, properly addressed, stating that my fence, as it stood, was not only compliant, but necessary. Karen never apologized, not directly. But a few days later, I saw her at the mailbox again, same place this started. She glanced at me, hesitated, then said, I didn't know. I nodded once. Most people don't. And that was it. No dramatic reconciliation, no sudden friendship, just an understanding. Quiet, incomplete, but real enough. The fence is still there. Same height. Same purpose. Water still flows where it's supposed to most of the time. But every now and then, when the sky opens up and the rain comes down a little harder than expected, I notice people looking toward that boundary line a little differently, like they're seeing something they missed before. And I think about that 1 inch, the one that almost disappeared because someone thought rules mattered more than reasons. So here's the question. If you were in that situation, would you have just cut the fence down and avoided the trouble? Or would you have done the same thing I did, knowing it might come back on everyone else before it proved your point? Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look right at all until it's too late to ignore. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious where you land on it.